This video is part of a tutorial series on using the Visual Authentication Journey Builder. It will cover using app settings and downloading XML for custom deployments for projects in the editor. We'll assume that we have our own test environment, other than the sandbox, that we want to deploy to, and we want our policy to have some different UI and behavior depending on where it's been deployed. For this example, we'll start out with a basic template policy. This template starts out with custom content definitions defined on components that present UI to the user. These are URLs to load custom HTML templates from, the basic mechanism for customizing the look and feel of the authentication user journey. If this field is left blank, a default Azure AD B2C UI appearance is applied instead. In this case, however, we have one set of HTML templates we want to use when deploying to the test sandbox, and a different set that we want to use when deploying to our local test tenant. Some components in the editor have this use value from app settings checkbox next to some of their fields. Selecting this option returns the field into a drop-down of all of the app settings that have been defined in the current project. To add or edit app settings, we can select the app settings panel of the editor. And here we can see the settings that have been defined and add additional ones. In our case, we have two different content definition URLs for each tenant that we want to deploy to. So we'll create two new app settings. The setting names can be effectively what you want. They're basically keys to reference the settings by. We can rename or delete existing settings, although many of the built-in settings can't be renamed or deleted. On the Environments panel, we can see the environments that are currently defined and edit their values. In the case of the sandbox, many of the default values are restricted against editing. We can see our additional settings that we added here, though, for the content definition URLs. We'll get those values from the template and copy them to there, so that the sandbox environment will use the default content definitions from the template. Now we can go through the policy to all the components that present UI to the user and configure them to take their content definition URL from the correct app setting from the ones we've defined. Now the policy would take its values from this app setting, depending on which environment it's been built for deployment to. We still have to create an environment for our custom environment, for our custom deployment environment on our own tenant, however. So we'll add it here. The new environment starts out with empty values for all of the defined settings. To generate XML that can actually be deployed to the tenant, we'll need to fill most or all or most of these out. But for now, we'll just fill out a few. Including our content definition URLs. We use an alternative value that corresponds to an HTML file we've created with an alternative content definition. This way, the test environment will have a different appearing UI from the sandbox. We also want the policies to do some other different behaviors depending on the deployed tenant, however. In this case, for testing, say we want to output a claim in the token indicating which environment the policy was run on. There are a couple different ways to do this, but here we'll use it by creating a claim containing a value from the app setting. First, we'll create a new claim we'll call deploy mode. Then we'll create an app setting for it and assign a value to it for each environment. On the sandbox, the claim will have the value sandbox, and on our own test tenant, the claim will have the value test. We have to actually set the value of the claim though. So first, we'll delete the edges going to the token issuer from the existing components in the template, and we'll add a new component before it instead. The set claims component is used to assign values to claims without showing any UI to the user. We'll select the deploy mode claim that we defined, set it from an app setting, and select the app setting we've defined to match it. At runtime, the value of the app setting for the environment that the policy was built for will be assigned to this claim. Now we take the components that were originally connected to the token issuer and connect them to the set claims component. After that, we'll connect the set claims component to the token issuer. This way, every route through the user journey will pass through the set claims component and have a value in the deploy mode claim. We'll also add it to the token so that we can retrieve it in the output. At this point, the policy is ready for deployment, at least to the sandbox tenant where we have values for all of the app settings. Direct deployment from the editor is only available for built-in environments anyways. Custom environments can't currently be deployed this way. For now, however, let's test the policy on the sandbox tenant. We can see the UI that the custom HTML templates are applying. If we log in as a user, we can also see that our output token contains the deploy mode claim and it has the value we set in the app settings for the sandbox tenant. If we want to deploy to our own custom environment, however, we can download the policy XML and then deploy it manually to our own tenant. The download policies button is how we can download the generated policy XML instead of trying to deploy it directly. If we select download for a specific environment, we can choose one environment and we'll download the XML built for that environment specifically. So if we choose the sandbox environment, we'll be able to download XML, both a base file and a relying party file, for the sandbox environment, ready to deploy with all of the app settings filled in. If we select the test environment, we're prevented from downloading with a message that there are empty app settings fields. We can override this and download XML for the test environment anyways. However, where it is any place where there are app settings that are empty in the test end settings that would appear in the XML, they'll instead have a placeholder settings tag. So the policy will no longer be immediately deployment ready. The XML will have to be edited manually after generation before it can be deployed to the tenant. If we uncheck download for a specific environment, we can select different environments that we want to generate XML for. And the generated policy XML will contain the placeholder tags for every app setting. However, we'll also get an additional file, an appsettings.json file, that encodes all of those app settings. And the Microsoft B2C custom policy extension for VS Code can then be used with the download XML and appsettings.json file to build those policies, filling in those settings fields for each environment defined in the app settings file. If we look here at the downloaded policies, we can see the relying party and the base policy that was downloaded when we downloaded for all environments. This is the XML generated by the editor. We can also see that these settings placeholder tags are there for the app settings where they would be used by the XML. Finally, here's our appsettings.json file, based on what we've defined in the editor. The Microsoft extension for VS Code for B2C custom policies can use this file to build the policies. I go to the command palette and select Build All Policies. And then it will generate an environments folder with a folder for each environment in our app settings containing the policies with those values filled in. You can see, for example, in the relying party for the sandbox tenant, the tenant ID has been filled in, and so on. In the test environment, however, you can see where the app settings were empty, there are still settings placeholder tags, and this policy wouldn't be able to deploy yet. This sums up an introduction to app settings in general. As a practice exercise, try creating a policy that can be deployed that can be fully deployed to 2 different tenants. You'll need to fill out each of the app settings fields for each tenant. There are tooltips in the editor for all of the default settings explaining what they are. Most of these will need a value before a policy can be deployed.